We must never forget that Russia is suffering terribly, both militarily and economically, and they're not as indomitable as they like to appear. And if we put a bit more pressure on them, not only the Europeans, but ideally the US too, they should be prepared to come to the table.
British troops serving on the ground in Ukraine could become a reality under an agreement to help settle a peace deal with Russia. The so-called Coalition of the Willing group of countries, the UK, France, Germany and many others, signed a declaration of intent to operate on Ukrainian soil, secure Ukraine's skies and seas, and build an armed forces fit for the future. It's a big commitment and unprecedented, but it depends, as ever, on a future peace deal with Russia, as ever, that has not indicated it will agree. Leigh Turner was Britain's ambassador to Ukraine from 2008 to 2012. He's also the author of a book, Lessons in Diplomacy, Politics, Power and Parties. He joins us now. Leigh, good morning to you.
Yeah, morning, Stig.
I guess the question we're trying to calibrate this morning is how optimistic or otherwise we should be. Are you a glass half full or a glass half empty guy this morning?
Well, it's very much both of those things, isn't it? What a chaotic start to 2026. Yeah. We've got this incredible mood of hubris in Washington. Team Trump is on a post-Venezuela high. That military operation having gone very smoothly, they seem to think anything is possible. Just look at their body language, look at their big grins. In fact, there's a cloud of uncertainty even about what's going to happen in Venezuela. We've got the same government still in charge. We've got the risk of a long-term collapse in oil production as storage runs out. But that doesn't stop the US also threatening a whole load of other countries: Mexico, Cuba, Iran, Colombia, and even Denmark. This is the opposite of the promises that the US president made when he was seeking re-election, of keeping out of foreign engagements. But it's a pattern that we always see, that when the domestic policies of leaders are not going well, they seek foreign adventures where it seems that they can do whatever they want. Now, this kind of hubris always collides with reality. But in the meantime, it can cause a lot of damage. And we've been seeing this in the situation on Ukraine, where the talk of occupying Greenland, perhaps even using military force against Greenland, absolutely torpedoed this summit of the Coalition of the Willing in Paris yesterday, because the European leaders felt they had to respond to these claims that the US might occupy Greenland.
So are you saying that the context that context is exactly right, of all the things that have happened in the last few days?
Yeah.
Does that make it less likely or more likely that the US would be willing to be interventionist in the way as outlined by this agreement, offer some form of security backstops to whatever Europe is willing to do?
Well, that is indeed the $64,000 question. And I think for me, the main thing that this tells us is that the US is fantastically unpredictable. Yeah. And of course, we've known this. This is Donald Trump's USB, is to be unpredictable. He thinks that's a good way of unbalancing his opponents. And I do think that this meeting yesterday of the Coalition of the Willing, headed up by France and the UK, was a good and useful meeting against this chaotic background. Talks of military hubs in Ukraine, that's good. A legal framework for troops to operate in Ukraine is good. It's great to lay the groundwork for a possible reassurance force in case, or in the hope that a peace deal can be implemented. But this all depends on US support. And it was great that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, these US envoys, were there yesterday at this Paris meeting. But it's very unclear how these security guarantees are going to work, whether they're really robust enough. There's no sign of agreement from Russia. Of course, the fact Russia says we won't accept NATO troops on Ukrainian territory doesn't mean it can't happen. But unless the US is prepared to get off the fence and start putting some pressure on Russia, there's no sign of Russia coming anywhere near a peace agreement. And at the moment, it's very unpredictable.
And I guess the question that follows is that America being a bit more activist in 2026, going after Venezuela, it's trying to get this Venezuelan ship that's breaking an oil blockade, which will have an effect on Russia as well. Is there an argument that America might be getting more interventionist at exactly the right time, and an American interventionism might extend to proper security guarantees to Ukraine, or is that just a folly to hope that?
It would be lovely to see the US offering clear expressions of support for Ukraine. I haven't seen those expressions. There has been talk of Kushner and Witkoff offering US support for security guarantees, but the nuts and bolts of this, Stig, are really important. Exactly how is that going to work? Are there going to be US air cover provided? Is there going to be US intelligence support? And what does that mean exactly? At the moment, it all seems a bit half-hearted to me, and I would love to see the US stepping up their support for Ukraine and stepping up their support for a peace deal. But at the moment, it feels as if we're still a long way from an agreement, unfortunately.
Is there any implicit quid pro quo in this, do you think, where Trump might say, or his people might say, or at least imply, we'll carry on supporting you in Ukraine, but at some point we're coming after Greenland, and we're not going to invade Greenland because we don't want to bring down NATO in that way, but we want Greenland, we've got some money. Denmark's hold over Greenland isn't necessarily that strong, and nor should it be. They don't have a sort of moral right to Greenland any more than anyone else does. But we're going to want Greenland, and you guys, you need to go along with that.
It's extremely risky what the US is doing about Greenland. This statement by a leading US commentator. I mean, first of all, there's Trump saying we need Greenland from a point of view of national security. That makes no sense at all, because the US already has a base there with only 200 people in it. Used to have 10,000 people in it. You know, what's the US playing at? If they want to defend Greenland, they could have some more bases there without having to own it. And then this chap saying, what gives Denmark the right to hold Greenland? The answer is international law and sovereignty. And if you don't care about those things, then the whole international system is going to break down, and NATO will be under extreme threat. Now, there's been a few comments, including by Marco Rubio over the last 24 hours, suggesting that, yeah, we're not going to attack it, we might want to buy it. And there are many ways to skin this cat. If the US wants a bigger security presence in Greenland, that's easy to arrange without these blood-curdling and extremely dangerous threats to invade a NATO ally.
Just finally, what your eyes are going to be on Putin? What do you expect him to say or do? Will he try and delay? What do you think will happen next from Putin's side? Because that's the other bit.
Yeah, the Russians have been extremely silent over the last week or so on Ukraine. A couple of weeks ago, they said they would not countenance any departure from the original 28-point plan. You may remember this. This was in the middle of November that the US and Russia suddenly announced a 28-point plan that basically gave Russia everything it wanted. And then the Europeans negotiated a 20-point plan, which didn't give Russia everything it wanted, and the Russians rejected that outright. So the Russians are so far keeping their cards close to their chest, but we must never forget that Russia is suffering terribly, both militarily and economically, and they're not as indomitable as they like to appear. And if we put a bit more pressure on them, not only the Europeans, but ideally the US too, they should be prepared to come to the table.
Glass half full to end it on, which I think is a nice way of doing it. Leigh, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.